Well, good morning. Glad that you are with us, guys. Let me just say that video is way more manly than I am. So, I feel like we're like trying to like really be like we're men too, right? We're really manly. So we're having a men's conference to prove it. So we can't wait. We're actually really excited about this. If you're a guy here, if you have a student that is in high school, a freshman on up. We're really excited to start bringing some of our young men into what we're doing here as a church to connect, to build some relationships. So, man, we would love for you to be a part of it. Here's the deal. It's just going to be one night. We've done different things in the past. We've done overnight retreats, and we know how challenging it can be to try to get away and try to cover things, especially in the fall. So we're going to do one night, and it's going to be a great time together. One of my good friends, his name's Blaine Bartell. He's been an amazing communicator, great story of God's redemption in his own life. And some of you who've been a part of Heritage for a while, you may remember Blaine. He's been here before. He's going to be speaking. It's going to be fantastic. We got tons of stuff, axe throwing. There's a charcuterie that we're putting together, going through it. So, yeah, I know, right? Charcuterie. It's like a table full of meat. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be wonderful. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Guys, we need 20 guys to sign up today, just so we can get this thing moving and making sure that it doesn't fall off the radar. So at some point throughout this morning in this message, you have my full permission. Take out your phone. Go to our website, heritagechurch.cc/men. You'll find our calendar that we're putting together. No, we're not doing that. But it just seems like a weird website to promote. But go to our webpage, sign up. It's only $35. That covers everything for the entire night. We've got giveaways, a lot of great stuff. It's going to be really cool. Make sure you sign up. We want to get 20 guys to sign up from this service and from next service. We want to pack this place out full of men and our friends and neighbors who want to be a part of it. So make sure you can pull it out and just register. You can even leave your phone up, check the scores, do whatever you'd like to do. No one's going to know the difference. They're going to think you're registering. So you're welcome. So pull that out. It's going to be great. We're excited about that this morning, and you'll hear a little bit more as we go over these next couple of weeks. But, I mean, this is going to be a great night, great opportunity to bring some friends of yours, and I promise it's going to be something that you'll be proud of and something that you're excited you came for, as well as the friends that are in your life as well that you took a risk and invited to come be a part of that. So that's our Heritage Men's Conference is coming up. Today we're kind of continuing a series that we started a couple of weeks ago called The Ugly Truth. And we started off kind of looking at this whole idea of relationships and what it looks like to navigate those strong feelings that we all have in light of relationships. How do you turn the things you're passionate about, or maybe that you've experienced, or things that you've been hurt through, and it's kind of formed what you feel. It's formed kind of how you respond and the guards that you put up. How do you take all of those things and work through them in a healthy way so that you can have long-lasting, healthy relationships? As you know, over the last couple of years in particular, but let's just be honest, the last couple of years hasn't been all that different from anything else we've ever experienced. We've always had political turmoil. We've always had cultural tension. We've always had things in our life that we had to deal with that we should have dealt with, right? We have things in our society that needed to be addressed, that should be addressed, right? All these things have been taking place. They've always put some pressures on our life and on our relationships. It just seems like over the last couple of years, it was like the dumpster fire that was life just got gasoline poured on it. But it's nothing new. It's always impacted our relationships. And those little things that happen throughout life put some pressure on us. They put some strain on our friendships, on our marriages, even relationships within the church. And so we just said, what would it look like if we actually tried to lean in and learn from some of this? What if we actually learned how to heal the fractures that have formed in some of those relationships that we care the most about? What if we learned what about us may have contributed to some of those things? What if we learned how to take some steps to repair and to protect those relationships? That's kind of what this series has been all about. Because if we don't learn from those things, we are going to repeat some of the same thoughts, the same behaviors, the same patterns that have already put a stress on our relationships. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to take an honest look at one of the relationships that I think is one of the most important that God designed so that you and I could understand his heart for us and especially for the church. And it's the marriage relationship. Now, some of you may not be married. You actually picked a great day to be here because we're going to talk about what it looks like and how God has a design for your heart. And so if you're not married, that's awesome. This is like something you get to tuck away and go, okay, now I've got a checklist. Now I know what I'm looking for as I grow and as I build relationships. If you are married, right, this is just going to be an honest kind of conversation and evaluation to assess where we're at and how we navigate those relationships that matter the most to us. Because how many of you know this to be true? Your marriage relationship, there's an awful lot at stake beyond your happiness. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to just get honest and have some conversations because over the last couple of years in particular, I have navigated more counseling conversations with couples than maybe the 10 years previously combined. There is something that is happening in the life of our relationships. There's something that's happening in the culture that begins to teach us that, hey, what you deserve is what makes you happy. And I'm just telling you, that's the worst advice you could ever take in your life. But we've done it. Hook, line, and sinker, we've taken those into relationships, and it's come at a cost. And so I think one of the best things we could do is just have an honest conversation about relationships, right? But you're also going to see as we go into this, so much of this can be applied to every relationship in your life. And so we're going to kind of talk about that today. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity, I don't do a lot of weddings, but I had the opportunity to do a wedding for a young couple in our church. And they were going through the service order, and we were talking, and we thought we had everything planned out. We was like, we're going to do this. They're going to play the music. We're going to walk down at this side. And we want to do a unity candle as well. I'm like, oh, okay. Unity, that's great. So I arrive, and it's an outdoor wedding. I'm like, oh, man, this is always a little bit tricky. One, thankfully, it was only like 50 degrees, right? Normally, it's like 80, and everyone in the seats are like, let's go, hurry it up, right? But this was outside. It was beautiful. It was on a golf course, but it was windy. And the entire time I'm going through this order and going through the officiating the ceremony, I'm looking out the side of my eye thinking, how are we lighting these unity candles? If you've ever been to a wedding, if you've ever seen this take place, usually there's a little table that's off to the side, and there's two kind of thin, smaller candles, and then there's one candle in the middle. And what happens, it's a beautiful thing, is at different points in the service, either the mothers or the families come up, they light each of the outside candles representing kind of their families, their stories, their chapters, that this is representative of us. And then at one point in the wedding ceremony, the bride and the groom, they come together and they take the candles and they reach them together and they light the center candle. Right? It kind of unifies that we are two families becoming one, but God is going to be at the center of our marriage. It's a beautiful thing. And as I'm going through this, all I'm thinking is there's no way these candles are lighting. Like this sweet bride, like she's had to like pull her hair back 10 times because it's so windy. But I'm like, all right, well, God, you parted the Red Sea. Maybe this is nothing for you. So I just say, hey, I'd like to invite the families to come up. And the two moms, they come up and they grab the lighter, which they couldn't figure out how to start the lighter. Those child locks get us all. Like, let's just be honest. And they're like clicking on it. Finally, it kind of goes, like people are huddled around. It feels like in that moment, like 3 hours just go by. And after a while, the bride goes, let's just skip it. Let's just skip this part. And so the moms were like, well, it's like, that's our only job. That's all. This is my day. So they sit there and you're going. So now, here's the thing. Now, as a pastor, you're like, okay, well, that's a pretty significant part of our service where we signify a bigger truth, that God is the center of your marriage. But if God doesn't want to light and he doesn't want to show up, like, what am I supposed to say? So all I could say in that moment was, hey, listen, it's just windy. Please don't take this as an omen. God still loves you. God's still the center of your life and the center of your marriage, right? If you've ever been to a wedding where that actually worked, it's this beautiful moment where you take those two candles and you light the center candle and it kind of burns bright. And here's the thing that every new couple doesn't understand fully on their wedding day, is that in that moment, that bright burning flame signifies so much hope. God is at the center. Our relationships are going to continue to burn bright. They don't fully understand that they're about to head into a different stage of life where reality sets in, where all of a sudden attraction starts to look a little bit different, where all of a sudden there's some things that they have to process, deal with, talk about that they never thought they were going to have to deal with. And before they realize it, that flame starts to flicker a little bit. What they don't realize is that they're about to head into a whole new chapter of life, and that chapter is filled with lots of other chapters that are about to come, where stress and pressure and communication problems and kids are going to come, and it is going to cause some fractures in their marriage. And if they don't learn how to tend to those fractures become bigger and bigger and bigger to the point of eventually breaking. And all of a sudden, what happens over time is if we're not careful, if we're not intentional, those pressures cause some strain. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves maybe a few months down the road, maybe a few years down the road, maybe a few decades down the road, but we find ourselves in that place where we go, well, what happened? I mean, we were once so close. What happened? What changed? And this slow erosion of our relationships, of our marriages, that is becoming more and more common. And so before we talk about how can we build a plan to be intentional and to heal and to restore and to protect our relationships, what I want to do is I want to talk about how relationships dissolve. Because every relationship is unique and it's different. But there's usually a few things that every relationship has in common, especially relationships that tend to dissolve over time. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of move through it pretty quickly, but I'm going to give us 4 stages that just about every relationship that started out strong and eventually has dissolved kind of went through, that eventually lead to distance in a marriage and relationships. And here's the reality. Actually, each of these stages you'll find in just about any relationship that matters to you, right? Whether it's a friendship, maybe it was just someone you used to be close with, now you're not. Each one of these things has this slow erosion that begins to take place, that if we're not careful, if we're not intentional, if we don't have a plan to navigate through those, it is an inevitable end that these relationships are going to find themselves in. And so before we talk about what it looks like to have a good relationship, a healthy relationship, because let's be honest, nobody has ever walked down the aisle with like plan B in their pocket going, we'll see. I'll give it a year, We'll see how it goes, If not, hey, no big deal, right? Nobody ever goes down the aisle that way. They walk into it thinking, till death do we part. But yet somehow that changes. Even within the church world, 1 out of every 2 marriages eventually end up in divorce, over 50%. That's a crazy number. Now, there are things that you can do that increases your odds, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But that is a reality that we have to navigate with. It used to be a bigger distance between those who weren't a part of the church and those who are, but that distance is kind of growing closer and closer between those things. And so we're going to talk about that and what it looks like. So before we talk about how to have a good marriage, because I think that's the goal. We want it. We all know that. But yet we still have some fractures, right? So knowing how to have a good marriage hasn't been enough. We also got to figure out how do relationships fall apart and dissolve, right? And so here's the deal. This isn't by any means to replace counseling or conversations and things like that, but we're going to kind of walk through it, and maybe you can relate to one of the stages that you may even find yourself in today. Here's the first stage. The first stage of relationship is what we'll call the romance stage. Right? This is that stage where, if you remember it, some of you might be in it right now, right? You might remember it from a while ago, but this is that stage of late night phone calls, right? Flowers and candlelights, long walks for no reason, right? You're just happy to be with each other. Mixtapes. Anybody ever provide their future bride with a mixtape, right? Yeah, I upped it a notch. I actually recorded myself singing on a mixtape that I gave to Amy before we were dating. And this is how cheesy it was. It was of worship songs. Like, right? Yeah. I was the guy that dressed it up as like, Joseph and Mary for Halloween, right? So I did mixtapes, right? You're trying to figure out that perfect. How many of you go so far back to remembering how to create a mixtape from the radio where you're recording it, where you're pressing start and stop just then. And if you missed it, if Casey Kasem went too fast, you're like, oh, I got to wait 12 hours. Right? You remember? Like, that's the real. If you didn't get a wife or a husband out of that, then I'm sorry, because that was a lot of effort putting that together, right? That's the stage of romance. You're willing to say things, do things that you normally wouldn't ever do because you are infatuated in relationships, right? Then maybe you get married and all of a sudden you're in that romantic honeymoon phase where the only thing on the menu is honeymoon salad. Lettuce alone, no dressing. Thank you. Thank you. Some of you are going to sit there at lunch and the kids are like, what? Yes. You're good. Right? That romance stage is remember our hearts were smitten. But here's the other thing that's crazy in the romance stage. Your grace for each other is through the roof. Right? That always happens in the romance stage. And then not too quickly, as you grow in familiarity, grow in a little bit of comfort level, that romance begins to fade a little bit, and you start to move to stage 2. Stage 2 is what we'll call reality stage. Right? This is when all of a sudden you're starting to do life together, and the pressures of life start to mount up. Work is getting tough, and maybe you're bringing it home, and you're having conversations about it. Finances are starting to play a picture. Kids may have entered into the picture. Your time, your availability, things change. Some of the things you found so appealing at the beginning is now starting to kind of rub you the wrong way. It's kind of frustrating you a little bit. Reality stage sets in. You start to look different than maybe you did when you first started dating. Start to feel different. And all of a sudden, without even realizing it, stage 3 appears. Stage 3 is what we'll call resentment stage. Now remember, these are the stages of relationships that tend to slowly erode over time. And while each one may be unique, this is the pattern that almost every relationship that I'm aware of has been rooted in some ways. That resentment stage is where resentment starts to set in. You start to get disconnected. You start to feel a little bit frustrated from what you thought you deserved, what marriage was supposed to be like, and then all of a sudden you find out this is reality. We're getting phone calls that we never expected. We're having to deal with things. We're talking about things. We're disagreeing on things. And all of a sudden that resentment starts to set in, and you may not even announce it to other people just yet at this point, but you're already starting to have conversations in your head that this isn't the person that I thought I was marrying. This whole season of life, this marriage thing, man, this parenting, this isn't what I pictured it would be. And this isn't what I feel like I deserve. Right? And you take an inventory of your heart and you start to discover it feels like you've lost that love and feeling. And now it's gone. 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 Whoa. Yeah. Right, but here's the thing. The vast majority of healthy relationships, it's at this stage that if something doesn't change or happen, you inevitably will find yourself in the final stage of relationship. Right? None of these stages are the end of the road. But this is that moment that if we don't recognize it, if we don't understand, hey, something has to change, then it's a matter of time before we find ourselves at stage 4. Stage 4 is what we'll call kind of that rebellion stage. And here's why. It's that moment you get into a relationship when you just go, I'm done. Right? I know I made some commitments, but so did he, and so did she, and neither one of them lived up. I'm done. I deserve to be happy. I've tried, but it's not working, so I'm not going to do this anymore. And in this stage, what happens is we stop investing into the relationships, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves going, it's just, I'm not worth it. I'm not worthy about this anymore. I'm done trying to make this thing work. And so then we start kind of pouring ourselves into our jobs, into our hobbies, into the idea of another life. We try to find fulfillment somewhere else, maybe even with someone else. And this distance grows, and some major determinations are made. All because we sit there one day and go, man, we used to be so close. What happened? Now it's different. And here's what I want to tell you. Maybe you identify, maybe you feel like you can go, hey, that's been me at every stage. Or man, that's the stage I'm in right now. Here's what I want you to know. This doesn't have to be your reality. Right? The other option before you give up, before you start leading separate lives in the same home, before you look for fulfillment in something or maybe someone else, is to immerse yourself in the restoring fractured relationships. Right? Even and especially within marriage. Right? That's kind of what these last few weeks have been talking about. We've been looking at this passage in Romans chapter 12, and we've been talking about this idea to use this as a guide to navigate us and our strong feelings into stronger relationships. And so what we've talked about is how you can't change another person, but you can allow God to transform and to change you. Right? And so as you surrender your whole life over to God, as you renew your mind, as you learn to create a better plan, you begin to increase your odds at healing the fractures in relationships. And if you remember last week, we talked about this verse, Romans 12:18, where it says, hey, as much as it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Well, just before that is a verse that you're going to see right now, verse 2. Where he says, here's what you need to do. Here's how you actually move forward in relationships. Be devoted to one another, right? Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourself. This is a really important part of this phrase. Because this is how the Apostle Paul is saying, listen, we've all got some fractures. We all have some things that we need to change, but you can't change that yourself. So you need to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Offer your whole body, your whole life as a living sacrifice to God. Let God do a work in you. Right? And here's what you can do. You can be devoted to one another in love. You can honor someone else in love. He's saying, hey, as far as that depends on you, that's possible. You can live at peace, and that's how you do it. And so if you've ever wondered how to kind of fan that flame in relationships, how do you continue to be devoted to one another, to honoring one another, that's what we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about. And here's what I want to do. I want to kind of begin by doing this. We have to begin by setting realistic expectations when it comes to relational intimacy, right? Because Hollywood doesn't do us any favors. You may read books, you hear songs, you see movies of characters on TV, and you go, oh, that's what I want. Like that, I want to meet them. I want our eyes to lock in a crowded room. And all of a sudden, it's like we have tunnel vision. Nothing else matters. No one else matters except for each other. Like, I feel like my heart's going to beat out of my chest, right? We watch movies like Titanic. We see Jack and Rose. We go, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want someone. I want our hearts to be overwhelmed, right? It is this intimacy skyrocket that is painted throughout Hollywood and throughout culture. But did you notice Jack died in the movie? Right? Intimacy skyrockets aren't sustainable, right? And Hollywood knows they can't make a movie of Jack and Rose after the Titanic, right? Sitting in their small apartment arguing over the bills that need to get paid or which way the toilet paper goes, because that's real life. But there's no movies about that, right? So Hollywood doesn't do us a whole lot of favors when it comes to our realistic or unrealistic expectations of what intimacy is supposed to look like. But that is the reality. We have to start in this way, because here's what I've noticed in my own life and in the relationships that I have that are important, that I get to be a part of. So often, the tension that grows in distance, right, that causes distance within a relationship, within a friendship, especially within a marriage, is the result of unmet expectations. Maybe it was an expectation that we thought we were clear on. Or maybe it was something that we had in our head, in our heart, our mind. We had this idea. We had this expectation of what life was supposed to be like, of what that person was supposed to be like, of what raising kids was supposed to be like, of what our future was supposed to be like. And then we're disappointed when that doesn't come close to reality. And so we have to have an honest conversation about being realistic in our expectations. Because maybe some of the fairy tales and some of the things that you've put into your heart and mind, maybe some of the other relationships that you've sat and looked at on Instagram and you thought, oh, they've got a great life. You're starting to realize that doesn't look like yours. And that's the problem. Social media is another big thing. Hollywood's another big thing. You're comparing your everyday life to the highlight reels of everyone else. And you feel like you got lost in the mix. Somehow you got gypped, shortchanged. So here's the deal. We have to be honest about these realistic expectations so that we can allow God's grace to work on us and to work on them, because it is possible for God to restore what seems broken or fractured in our lives and for those to be healed. Right? Here's how it's possible. Here's what being devoted looks like. Right? I gave you 4 stages of kind of relationship drift that if you're not careful, if you don't start to make some changes along the way, that's the inevitable pathway for most relationships that kind of erode over time. Right? So let me just give you 3 ways to build and to grow intimacy. Right? Because this is the thing that we're wanting to do. And here's the thing. Everything I'm probably going to share, you've heard it in some phrase or another. There's nothing really all that new. Knowing how to have a healthier marriage and choosing to put in the work to build one are 2 different things. And so what I'm going to share with you, I think are really helpful steps. I've seen it changing my life and my own marriage and the marriages of friends that I love and care for. So I know this works. It's just whether or not you're willing to jump in and say, okay, I'm going to be a part of that. Because this matters way too much to just let it fade away. So let me give them to you. John chapter 13, Jesus is standing in front of a crowd of people. And he starts off this way. He says, a new command I give to you. Right now, Jesus' day wasn't much different than ours when it came to people's desire to have a better life. So when Jesus, this well-respected rabbi, is saying, hey, listen, I've got something new that I want to teach you. Something that will help you have a better life. Everyone starts to lean in. Everyone's kind of hushing the crowd going, hey, listen, what's Jesus going to say? So Jesus says, hey, a new command I give to you. Love one another. Now, everyone in that room would have been like, that's it? Like, Jesus, we've heard this since we were little. Like, we've always known this stuff. We've always heard about this. When we went to Sunday school at the temple, like, they would always talk about the importance of, like, this isn't anything new. But what Jesus was about to do was Jesus was about to kind of change and transform the way that people viewed relationships. Right? What Jesus was about to do is saying, hey, listen, you think love is something that you fall into and you fall out of. So I'm going to change that. And all throughout the Gospels, you see this transformation take place in Jesus' vocabulary. He takes this commonplace word and he transforms it. He turns the word from a noun into a verb, right? It's no longer just a word you say, but now it's something you do. In other words, he takes this idea, this concept of love, and he goes beyond and transforms it from attraction to now action, right? And here's the thing, all of us on some level, whether it's friendship or dating or marriage, have struggled when it comes to putting action to our love, to our friendships, to our marriages, to actually taking what's in our hearts and transforming that into some kind of action in our relationships. But here's the thing. That's where we have to begin, because that is the foundation of any healthy relationship in our life. See, real love, listen to me, this is important. If you're new to marriage, if you're dating, if you're thinking about marriage, this is really important for you to understand it from the very beginning. Real love is action-oriented. It is outward focused. It's actually not about you. It's not about your happiness. It's not about your personal satisfaction. Real love that Jesus starts to say, I'm going to give to you this new command. Man, it was action driven. It was focused on someone other than themselves. So here's the thing. I want to give you 3 ways that you can put your love into action. 3 ways to love one another, to be devoted to one another, to honor one another. And again, if you're not married, you can apply this same concept, themes, into any relationship that is important to you in your life. Because each one of these things go a really long way to building intimacy, real intimacy in a relationship, in a marriage. Here's the first one. We'll call it day-to-day. Day-to-day intimacy. How do we build that? Well, here's what you'll discover. A lot of couples who have a healthy marriage protect and increase their intimacy by intentionally sharing life together. Right? They don't just co-lead or cohabitate, but they actually talk through the details of their day. They go through their calendars and they go through conversations together. And they sit and they have good conversations. They start to debrief about what took place throughout the day. They share their ups and they share their downs. And every wedding that I get to officiate, I always take a moment and just say, here's one of the most important things you can do as you start a brand new chapter in your relationship. Take a few minutes a day and ask each other, what was the best part of your day and what was the hardest? Build that rhythm in every single day from the very beginning. Why? Because when you start to share life, and you start to open up your heart and give some insight into what you're thinking and feeling, man, it starts to draw you closer into relationship. There are so many different times throughout our season as a married couple where Aim and I, we get busy, we start doing things, and we start to go, oh, man, what are you doing today? Wait, you got oh, man, okay. Well, we can't do that because I already committed to this. Right? And all of a sudden, we're realizing sometimes it's kind of like two ships just kind of passing in the night. You ever been there? No, just me? Thank you. Thank you for that moment of vulnerability that you just left me out to dry. So we started a rhythm. Every Sunday night, we sit down and we start walking through our coming week. We talk about what we've got going on. We talk about the whole week at a glance. And then each day, we do a little bit of a check-in. And I'm telling you, something as simple as that started to help us feel more connected. And it started to build our intimacy. I'm telling you, look at couples that you know that are doing well. And you'll discover they make it a priority to connect with each other day by day. Right? Here's the thing. When you exchange this information, all of a sudden couples are drawn closer. They show interest. They start sharing details. They stay connected in this way. Here's what I think is fascinating, what I'm trying to grow in my own life, in my own marriage, is that the people that do this well, they have managed to take the mundane and make it meaningful. Look at the couples that you know that have a healthy marriage. They have managed to take the mundane, like who's got to take kids to what practice, and they share it. They've made it meaningful because they're opening up their hearts and they're doing this, and it creates day-to-day intimacy. Right? Here's the other one. It's what we'll call heart-to-heart intimacy. Right? This takes it kind of a step further. This is emotional intimacy. It goes a little bit beyond just logistics and calendar management, right? This is those honest questions to the answers about hope or dreams or fears or ambition that you have in life. These are those heart-to-heart moments and conversations. We were good at this in the romance stage. We were great when we would have conversations and talk about what our future could look like, what our kids could look like. We even entered in our characteristics on the computer to see what a modulated, morphed out vision of our children would look like 10 years later, right? We were great when it came to those moments. It's just something happens as we head into the reality stage. All of a sudden, we stop having those conversations. We start talking about what we're afraid of. We start talking about what we're hopeful for, what we have a picture of, the things that we'd like to see, what our future could be. When we have those conversations, our hearts begin to melt together a little bit more. And that's what this is about. It's about connecting our hearts again to each other. And so we start to have those conversations where we share, where it gets beyond just logistics and calendar management and moving things around, to now we're starting to ask those questions of each other. Questions like, man, how was that? Or what was that like for you? Oh, man, how did that make you feel when that took place? Right? We begin to express that. And I get it. Some of us, maybe guys in particular, we're going, that's not my thing. Not really a heart guy. Just kind of want to skip it all and head straight to the bedroom, to talk and enjoy each other's company. Here's the thing. Some of us, because we start this way when it comes to relationships, we go, well, they know what I feel. I don't need to tell them. They already know I love them. They know that I care for them. That's not really my thing. Listen to me. That's about as silly as an approach as a heart surgeon withholding treatment for you because you took a PE class in junior high. See, there's something important about expressing those things. If all we do is go, no need, they already know it. That doesn't actually work towards healing relationships or fractures or building connection or intimacy, right? Just because you think they already know it doesn't mean that it's being put into practice. And so here's what I would encourage you. Steal some moments. Be intentional with the little ways that you can show interest and appreciation and love. Write notes, send texts, buy them some flowers, right? Use your words to connect the dots of express love, right? That's a game changer. And here's why this is important. It is really hard to restore fractured and stressed out marriages without heart-to-heart intimacy. So building, healing, protecting, nurturing those relationships takes some intentionality. Right? We say this a lot if you've ever been here around Heritage much, is that you will never drift into a healthy and fulfilling relationship, but you can certainly drift out of one. Because it takes a lot more than love and feelings. It takes a plan, an intentional plan to protect and to nurture intimacy. Right? Without it, man, the pressures of life, the stresses of life, it's going to cause some serious fractures. Right? And the ugly truth is, if we don't learn to heal the fractures that have formed, then trust me, you are on a path that leads to heartbreak for you and for the ones that you love. Because there is always more at stake than your immediate gratification or your unmet expectation or idea of happiness. Right? That's why we have to be intentional about healing and building intimacy. Build it day to day, heart to heart. Here's the last one we'll talk about. Soul to soul. Day to day, heart to heart, soul to soul. Listen, if you are wanting to repair a stressed out marriage, if you're feeling like, man, we've lost that love and feeling a little bit, we've got really stuck in the logic or the logistics and the calendar management, man, we don't feel like we're close, we don't feel like we're connected, we don't feel like we're having much intimacy. If you're wanting to protect what matters most, here's what I tell you. Point each other's spirit to Jesus. Point each other's spirit to Jesus. God has a design for intimacy in the context of relationships, and it begins by keeping God at the center of your lives and your relationships. Right? And here's a great thing about how God works. As you seek the heart of God together, you learn the heart of each other. Right? As you seek the heart of God together, you learn the heart of each other. Right? And so the reason the flames tend to flicker in our marriage is because the details of life, the pressures, the pulling away of our attention, it squeezes out what matters most. And so what happens is we spend so much of our time getting things done or taking the next hill or kind of trying to live in light of the vision of our future that we overlook the relationships that matter the most, especially our relationship with Jesus. And so what happens is that God becomes the afterthought in our family. And so as we slip from romance into reality and maybe even into resentment and we start pouring into other things looking for fulfillment, you know what begins to happen, especially for those of us who once put God at the center of our life, at the center of our marriage? All of a sudden we start to put activities and schedules and sports or our own relaxation first and end up just giving our crumbs to God. You go, I can't really serve others. I'm so busy. I can't give right now. We got a future we're trying to work on. We got some ideas what we're trying to do. I don't have time to kind of work on my heart, build some friendships and community. I got so much going on. And so we forsake the ultimate for the immediate. We create life according to us, and then we try to fit God in and around all of it. And so what often happens in our walks of faith is the very things that God used to draw our hearts closer to Him, right? The very things that deeply impacted us, that led us to receiving God's gift of salvation for our life, become the very things we discard once life seems to be moving in a better direction. See, there was a point where somebody reached out and served and created an environment for you to hear about Jesus, and your life was changed. It was the very thing that drew you to Jesus, but now it becomes a thing you throw away because you don't have time, because it's just easier. My life's full of other stuff right now. The thing that drew you to Jesus, now you push away because your life seems to be going okay. Man, the atmosphere, that relationship, the sacrifice of someone else, those things, and even may have helped you. You became a Christian, and you started giving back and helping make a difference in the lives of others. But then life got busy, and you began to push those things aside because life was okay. And we do this time after time after time again. We stop putting Jesus first in our lives and in our family. We attend church whenever we have a free weekend, but it's not a priority. We become experts at coming up with reasons why we can't serve or help others experience what we experience until life gets hard again. Then we wake up and we try to talk to God and we go, oh, we used to be so close. What happened? So friends, let me just tell you this. If you don't feel close to God, it's not God who moved. If you don't feel close to God, it's not God who moved. And if this is a familiar pattern for your relationship with the creator of your life, it will become a familiar pattern in your relationship with others, especially your spouse. So Jesus says, hey, I've got this new command that I want to give you. He says, I want you to love one another. But he doesn't stop there. He shows us where we get to draw strength from. He says, I want you to love one another as I have loved you. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. See, the ugly truth is life is hard. It can be unpredictable. It can be beautiful, awkward, messy, unfair. And there are many times when we want to do what is best for us and forget what matters most. But any relationship of any kind of value that is in your life is built on something bigger than your personal satisfaction or happiness. See, when we love one another, when we serve one another, when we forgive one another, that gap between reality and romance begins to close. Right? And here's the thing, I can't do this on my own. This is where the miracle of Christianity comes, with God transforming me. I now have God working in and through my life to do things that I could never do on my own. Right? And so what Jesus was telling those disciples, he says, hey, this is something you need to know. Love is not a feeling. It's a choice. Every day I get to choose to let God, not some other person, fill my needs and be the source of my life. Every day I am choosing to serve that person and to put their needs above my own. Every day I am choosing to invest in my relationship or in my marriage, to be devoted to them, to honor them, to sacrifice to them, to be intentional about healing and building and protecting intimacy in my relationship and in my marriage. That was a new command. And it blew everybody away. And here's the great, Jesus said, it's not just about you. It's not even just about your marriage. The reason this is so important is because the world is watching. And they're going to see how you treat people. They're going to see how you treat friends, your spouse, how you love them. It's going to be a reflection of me. And that starts by getting my most important relationship first right. And that is my relationship with Jesus. And maybe, if we're being honest, maybe you've allowed that light to grow a little bit dim in your life. Maybe it's just hanging on like a flicker, but a strong wind that's going to come through that life will bring your way will just snuff it out. Here's my encouragement. Reignite it. Reignite it. Put God at the center of your life. Put God at the center of your marriage. Put God at the center of your friendships. Make decisions through the eyes of Jesus first, I'm telling you, it will go a really long way to healing and to restoring some friendships, some relationships, maybe a marriage that feels like the lights have flickered and you're not sure if it's going to stand another strong wind. Put Jesus first at the center. Can I just take a moment? If you just take a second, just bow your head, close your eyes for just a moment. I'm going to invite you just to take a couple of minutes here while Pastor Jordan leads us in a moment to just reflect on where you're at in life, where you're at in your relationships, where you're at in your faith, and to allow God to reignite a flame in your heart. And if you've never made a decision to put your life in Jesus' hands, to surrender it all, say, Jesus, you are the Savior of my life. I'm done doing life on my terms. In these next few moments, I want you to have that conversation with God. And just say, God, here I am. Man, would you come into my heart? Would you come into my life? I'm done doing life on my terms. Because God's heart has always been for you. May we never forget that and allow that to pierce our hearts today. In Jesus' name.